Now adjourn. Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for giving the House this opportunity to pay tribute to and mark the passing of the great Billy McNeil, who died last month at the age of 79. And we have plenty of time this evening, and I will be as generous as the House requires in taking interventions, as I'm sure many will want to contribute. Billy McNeil is rightfully considered as being one of the finest footballers of his generation, and it's safe to say that what he has achieved in his glittering, trophy-laden career will never be matched. And at the outset, Mr Deputy Speaker, I should declare a personal interest to the House. Firstly, my great-great-grandfather John O'Hara was one of the founding fathers of Celtic Football Club back in 1888. And secondly, I am a very, and I should stress the word very, minor shareholder in the club. And most importantly, like thousands of other wee boys growing up in Glasgow in the 1960s and 1970s, Billy McNeil was my hero. And who better was there for a wee boy to model himself on or to aspire to become than this tall, handsome, athletic, intelligent, articulate man who was actually doing what every one of us dreamed of doing, playing for and captaining the football team that we loved. I will. It wouldn't be an adjournment date if you...
I want to know who's going to sell this in Northern Ireland. Jim Shannon.
If you listen, you'll find out. Billy, first of all, can I congratulate the honourable gentleman bringing it forward. Billy McNeil has had a long association with Celtic, spanning more than 60 years as a player, manager and a club ambassador. As a player and a manager, he won 31 major trophies with Celtic. As a lifelong Rangers Football Club supporter, as I am, I appreciate very much the contribution he made to Scottish football and old firm games alike. Does the member not agree that he will be greatly missed by those who love the beautiful game across all the football teams in Scotland, Europe and the rest of the world?
I genuinely and sincerely thank the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, for that contribution. And he is absolutely right, and it's something I will touch on later in my speech, but he did bring together what I think were the very best in people and the very best in football. And I thank the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, for that contribution. I will make a bit of progress and I will come back to the honourable lady.
You're brave.
Mr Deputy Speaker, Billy McNeil was a one-club man, and that club was Celtic, for whom he played a remarkable 822 times between 1957 and 1975, and no other player in the club's 131-year history has pulled on the famous green and white hoop shirt more often than Billy McNeil. In an 18-year career as a Celtic player, Billy McNeil won 9 consecutive Scottish League titles, 7 Scottish Cups, 6 Scottish League Cups, and of course he captained Celtic to their greatest triumph when they beat Inter Milan 2-1 in the European Cup final to become champions of Europe in 1967. And among all of that, he was also capped 29 times for Scotland. I promised the honourable lady.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I think the honourable gentleman has made an excellent start in his speech and his tribute to Billy McNeil. Would he agree with me that even football fans and football players from rival clubs all are united in their admiration of Billy McNeil, and he is in particular an inspiration to young men who aspire themselves to play football for Celtic or other clubs?
Well, the honourable lady is absolutely right, and as I mentioned earlier on, growing up in the 1960s and 1970s, Billy McNeil was that iconic figure. He was what little boys like me aspired to become, and sadly failed miserably ever to reach those ends. But I have not given up the hope that my time is yet to come, and that Celtic's scouting system will be looking for a very poor, very overweight 56-year-old. But one lives in hope.
Will my honourable friend give way? As one of the very few people in this chamber who actually remember the cup final on a flickering black and white television with my parents, I'm very proud to think about Billy McNeil. My husband, my father, supported Ayr United, he was a lost cause. But my husband was a lifelong Rangers supporter, and I think one of the iconic images after Billy McNeil died was John Gregg and his truly emotional approach to Celtic Park with the wreath in remembrance of Billy McNeil. And it's people like the late Billy McNeil that can unite the whole of Scotland, no matter what team they support, and he should be applauded for it.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and it's something I will touch on momentarily about how we brought communities together. Yes, I will give way. I know that the honourable member knows that I am not a Celtic fan. I'm not quite in the same camp as the honourable member for Strangford, but nevertheless, I do have 6 brother-in-laws who are all mad Celtic fans. So to Kevin, Terence, Mark, Bernard, Michael and Mullins, can I say that they have told me over the years that while they were born within 30 miles of Celtic Park, the whole Celtic team that won the Cup final, the European Cup final in 1967 were also born within 30 miles of Celtic Park. Doesn't that make Billy McNeil's leadership and the way he managed to get that team to the final and win it, doesn't that say an awful lot more than, for example, some teams who have looked a bit more like the United Nations when they get to a European Cup final these days? And isn't it an absolute fantastic achievement for the whole team that they managed to do that within such a small area? The honourable gentleman is absolutely correct, and it's something I will come on to. It's just that nature of the team that won the European Cup in 1967 and how close-knit they were and how they represented their communities in a way which sadly today is such a rarity. And may I say, one would have thought that having 6 brother-in-laws, that some of them would have made more of an impression on the honourable gentleman than they clearly have. But of course, after he hung up his boots, Billy McNeil went on to enjoy a very successful career in football management, with Clyde, Aberdeen, Manchester City, Aston Villa, and very briefly with Hibernian. And twice he managed his beloved Celtic, most notably steering them to a League and Cup double in the centenary season of 1988. Yes, I will.
As a lifelong Manchester City fan, I'm disappointed, obviously, that I can't be in Manchester tonight for the treble winners parade. But it does give me the opportunity to pay tribute to Billy McNeil for his period of time as manager of City. And it was a tough gig being manager of City in the mid-80s. And we shouldn't forget the achievements the things he did for the club. And he left in rather difficult circumstances. Can you believe he was frustrated because City had no money to build the team that he wanted? But we should not forget that he stabilised our club and he got us promoted back to the top flight, and we remember him at Manchester City fondly as well.
Thank the Lord for that. And as he says, change days indeed, the idea of Manchester City having no money. But even in retirement, Billy McNeil maintained a close relationship with the club, and it was put on a more formal basis in 2009 when he became Celtic Football Club's first ever official ambassador. And through it all, Mr Deputy Speaker, and despite enjoying this fabulously successful career, one in which propelled him into the realms of superstardom, being adored by tens of thousands, Billy McNeil remained unaffected and unchanged. He always saw himself as the fan who got to live the dream, and he was living it on behalf of hundreds of thousands of us who never could. And I believe it was that, more than anything else in his success, which as a player forged that unbreakable link between Billy McNeil and the Celtic support. For the last few years of his life, Billy lived with Alzheimer's, and his public appearances became fewer and fewer. The last time I saw Billy McNeil was just last year at Celtic Park. And just before kick-off, he and his wife Liz walked from the car park towards the front entrance. The crowded concourse partied, and everyone, from pensioners to primary school kids, stood and cheered and applauded. Because to us fans, whether you were old enough to have seen him play or not, Billy McNeil was Celtic. And when he passed away last month, the sincerity of the tributes and the esteem in which he was held, far beyond Celtic Football Club and its supporters, was truly something to behold. Football giants Sir Ken Dalglish and Sir Alex Ferguson were among those present at the Requiem Mass at St Aloysius in Glasgow, as was former Rangers manager Walter Smith. And it was great to see Rangers legends John Gregg and Willie Henderson there too, demonstrating the huge mutual respect that existed between players of both teams, those teams who went toe-to-toe for the honours throughout the 1960s and 70s. And not only was there a mutual respect, Mr Deputy Speaker, there was also long-lasting, firm friendships that were established across the great footballing divide in Glasgow. I will give way.
Thank you very much for giving way. As one who may be in political opposition and indeed to a degree football opposition, would my honourable friend agree that Billy McNeil was iconic? He was a great ambassador both on the park and off the park, not just for Celtic but for Scottish football worldwide, not least of all European-wide, when your team took the European Cup, and Scotland should be proud of it. And remember Billy McNeil well as an iconic player in Scotland.
Honourable gentleman for that, and he is absolutely correct. And I'll come on later to that golden era of Scottish football, where, understandably and probably rightly, Celtic pick up the credit and the limelight, but there was so much to celebrate in 1967 as Scottish football fans. Mr Deputy Speaker, I was lucky enough to have met Billy McNeil on a number of occasions, both as a fan and latterly in a professional capacity. And people always say, never meet your heroes, you'll only be left disappointed. But in meeting Billy McNeil, nothing could have been further from the truth. One of the first times I met him was in Celtic's centenary season, the season of 87-88. I'd won first prize in a raffle. Well, actually, it wasn't me, it was my mum that won first prize, and I was sent to collect her star prize, a brand new, all-singing, all-dancing colour telly. The second prize was a signed Celtic shirt and a ball, and the opportunity to watch a Celtic game from the Celtic Park director's box. Fortunately, I managed to persuade the organiser that as the person who won the raffle, I should be given the choice of which prize to take. And safe to say, my mum never got her new telly. But me and my brother Dermot, we got to Celtic Park, and what's more, Billy McNeil, as manager, took us into the home dressing room an hour before kick-off to meet the players ahead of a crucial match against Aberdeen. It was a wonderful and remarkable gesture because, despite the importance of the fixture, he knew what it meant for fans like us to have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be in the Celtic changing room before a big match. And therefore, I am deeply honoured that today, 32 years on from that day, I am able to go some way in repaying that kindness by leading the tributes to Billy McNeil on the floor of the House of Commons. Over the years, our paths crossed, and when I was working as a TV producer-director, I had occasion to interview Bill McNeil on a number of documentaries in which I was working. And he would always make himself available, and his interviews would be invariably thoughtful and considered. But they were also incredibly frustrating, because no matter how much I wanted him to talk about himself and what his contribution was, he simply wouldn't, or probably couldn't. All he could talk about was the contribution of those around him. And an interview with Billy McNeil would be full of, yeah, that's all very well and good, but Jimmy Johnson did that, or yes, if it wasn't for John Clark's contribution, I'd have been nothing, or that was Bobby Murdoch, what a player Bobby Murdoch was. And I was reminded of what Jock Stein said when someone asked him, what makes a great player? And Jock Stein replied, a great player is the one who brings out the best in others. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about Billy McNeil. And to me, Mr Deputy Speaker, that sums up Billy McNeil. As I said, rarely, if ever, would he talk about how he felt or give himself the praise which he was absolutely due. Yes, I'd love to
get away and for securing this debate. He's mentioning Billy McNeil, the leader. He inspired confidence in the people around him. I remember as a little boy going with my dad to see Celtic for the first time. It was April the 1st, 1969. It was Celtic were playing at St Johnstone at the old Muirton Park, and my dad had built me up for going to see Celtic because as a little boy from the north east of Scotland, obviously I hadn't had the opportunity to see Celtic. My dad worked on a Saturday, he was a butcher. 2-0 at half-time for St Johnstone. And my dad said, because I was quite fraught, I was 8, and my heroes were being beaten. And he said to me, don't worry about it, Stephen. He said, they'll come back in the second half and win 3-2. And they did. And that inspirational feeling that Billy McNeil would permeate was evident in 1988 at that cup final when Celtic won 2-1 against Dundee United. And Mrs Thatcher presented the Scottish Cup that day. It was a very memorable day, but Billy McNeil, a great leader in every respect, a model of professionalism and leadership for all of us.
Doing so well. The honourable gentleman was doing so well. He's right, he did. But he's right in what he says. Particularly in that centenary season, there was just an aura. There was something you knew. And if you will recall the semi-final as well against Hearts when Celtic were a goal down heading into injury time. Somehow we scored 2 in injury time to get to the final. We were a goal down in the final. And everyone just knew it was going to be okay because it was written in the stars and we believed it was going to be okay, and it was okay. And Mr Deputy Speaker, going back to Billy McNeil and that self-effacing character of his, and the one time I did get him to talk about himself and how he felt, even then, it was talking about the greatest moment of his career, when he went up to lift the European Cup in Lisbon in '67. But what he wanted to talk about was his regret at having to go alone to pick the cup. Because of the way that the stadium was configured, all of his teammates were back in the dressing room and he alone was taken across the pitch and given. And that was what he wanted to talk about, was how he led a team and yet he was left to pick up Europe's Premier Trophy on his own while his team were back in the dressing room. But that's the kind of player Billy McNeil was. It's the kind of captain Billy McNeil was, and I believe it's the kind of man that Billy McNeil was. Mr Deputy Speaker, Billy McNeil was born in Bells Hill in Lanarkshire on May the 2nd. And 2 seconds, I'll get straight to this. In March the 2nd, 1940, his dad, Jimmy, a Dundonian, was a career soldier who served 22 years with the Black Watch. His mum, Ellen, was the daughter of a Lithuanian migrant family who, as Billy says in his autobiography, left Lithuania believing they were heading to the United States, only to be dumped in the docks of Leith by some unscrupulous sea captain. But my goodness me, Mr Deputy Speaker, America's loss was most certainly Scotland's gain. And his maternal grandparents gravitated towards Lanarkshire, where they settled with around 7,000 other Lithuanians who had settled there primarily to work in the coal mines. I'll give way.
Thank you very much for giving way. And we've discussed this outside of this chamber, but I'm very proud to have a strong familial link with Billy, the legend, Billy McNeil. My grandma, who was of Lithuanian descent, and Billy's mum, who was known as Nellie, were very close friends. And indeed, I understand that Nellie went out with my great-uncle Charlie before she was married to Billy's dad. My great-uncle Charlie was a wonderful man. He was Labour to his core. He was Celtic, and obviously he was Lithuanian. As I'm sure we'll hear from my honourable friend shortly, Belsill was very proud, and indeed should be very, very proud of perhaps its most famous son.
I'll come to you in a second. How different the course of history could have been had Uncle Charlie, managed to woo Nellie. And on behalf of Celtic fans everywhere, I'm very, very, very glad that he didn't.
I thank all friends for this. As an MP for Coatbridge, Christ and Bellshill, I know Bellshill's already talking about doing some sort of statue to Billy McNeil to recognise a great man, but also from Lanarkshire, someone who grew up in Lanarkshire. My brother was born in 1867 and his first words were Celtic. I also knew Jimmy Johnston very well. I knew Jimmy all through his career and all through his life. I knew him through the pub, and through the pub I got to meet a lot of the Lisbon Lions, an absolute pleasure, and God rest them all. Thanks very much.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that. I will come to the lady in just a moment. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that contribution. And it does show that every one of us in Scotland seems to have that 2 or 3 or single degree of separation. And it is often said it is the largest village in the world. And it's very true. I remember my dad telling the story that when Billy McNeil first signed for Celtic, my dad was a sales rep, Billy worked in insurance, and he used to meet Billy for coffee in the afternoon. Of course, everybody claimed to know Billy McNeil. And my dad used to tell the story that he wasn't actually known as Billy McNeil, he was known as Willie McNeil. And we never really believed this, but when he left Celtic to join Manchester City, my dad wrote to him, "Dear Willie," and he got a letter back saying, "Dear Charlie, thank you for the letter. Best regards, Willie." And it's that degrees of separation. Everybody seems to know everybody. And the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. The Lanarkshire connection continues.
I don't wish in any way to introduce a note of contention in this debate, but the Honourable Member for Coatbridge, Christen and Bellshill should know that the Lithuanian club in Bellshill is in my constituency, and as Billy McNeil is half Lithuanian, I'm claiming him.
Well, I will leave Lanarkshire to decide which part is which. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, Billy McNeil attended a ladies' high school in Motherwell, where he gained highers in English, maths and Spanish, and could easily have gone on to university. But he excelled on the football pitch and was being looked at by Arsenal, Manchester United, Newcastle, Clyde and Partick Thistle, when in 1957 he was selected to play for Scotland's schools against England at Celtic Park. The match, which Scotland won 3-0, was watched by Jock Stein, who was then the reserve team coach at Celtic. And so impressed by what he saw was Jock Stein that he immediately persuaded the club to sign this young talent. And I would love to say then that the rest is history, or that it was plain sailing from then on in, but it was far from it, because ironically Billy McNeil's arrival at Celtic Park coincided with one of the most dismal periods in the club's history. The wilderness years, in which not a single trophy was won in almost a decade, and a period in which the club finished 6th, 8th and even 9th on one occasion in the old First Division. In addition, Jock Stein had left the club to become manager of Dunfermline, and Celtic appeared to be caught in an inescapable downward spiral. And Billy too had plenty of opportunities to leave. Indeed, Bill Nicholson, the legendary boss of Tottenham Hotspur, in 1963 he offered to quadruple Billy's wages if he'd agreed to move to White Hart Lane. Tempted as he was, he turned them down, such was his loyalty to Celtic. And yet he probably had occasion to regret that as the malaise at Celtic Park deepened in the 1960s. And it wasn't until Jock Stein arrived back at Celtic Park in May 1965 that things began to change, almost immediately for the club and Billy personally. Within weeks of Stein's arrival, Celtic had won their first trophy in almost a decade. Billy McNeil scored a late winner against Dunfermline in the '65 Cup final to herald a hitherto unimaginable period of domination of Scottish football by Celtic. And my dad was lucky enough to be one of the 108,000 people packed inside Hampden that day to see history being made, as was, if I'm not mistaken, the Honourable Member for Limehouse and Poplar, who we had this conversation last week. In the following season, Celtic won their first Scottish League title in 11 years and qualified for the European Cup for the first time. On their way to becoming the first team from these islands to be crowned champions of Europe, Celtic had to overcome the champions of Switzerland, France, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, before beating the mighty Inter Milan, champions of Italy, in the final itself. That team of local boys, as we've heard, all born within 30 miles of Celtic Park, a team that cost just £30,000 to assemble, a team led by the grandson of a Lithuanian miner. That they could achieve this is quite simply a fairy tale. And it's a fairy tale, I believe, that will endure for as long as there are people alive to talk about football. That game in Lisbon was won by an 84th-minute winner by Stevie Chalmers. And if I may, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to Stevie Chalmers, who sadly died just a few days after the passing of Billy McNeil. A marvellous player for both Celtic and Scotland. As I said, he scored the most important goal in the history of Celtic Football Club that day in Lisbon. And for Celtic fans, that day, whether you were there or not, indeed whether you were born or not, that afternoon has left an indelible mark. Indeed, I cannot remember a time in my life where I couldn't rhyme off the team of Simpson, Craig, Gemmell, Murdoch, McNeil, Clark, Johnston, Wallace, Chalmers, Auld and Lennox. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, growing up in a family of Celtic fanatics, when all the aunts and uncles and the cousins got together, we would inevitably talk football. And in the years after Lisbon, the stories would be told again and again. Interestingly, however, the most oft-repeated tale wasn't about Lisbon itself. In our family, the most revered tale was that of Billy McNeil's last-minute winner against the Yugoslav champions Vojvodina in the quarter-final. Having pulled a goal back from the first leg thanks to yet another Stevie Chalmers goal, a place in the semi-final of the European Cup looked certain to be decided by a play-off in Rotterdam. With the game in injury time, Celtic won a corner, and as he did so often, Billy McNeil rose above everyone. Indeed, some say hung in the air for an extraordinary length of time to head home that vital goal. And for those who were at Celtic Park that night, the image of Billy McNeil's winning goal is probably the most enduring moment of their Celtic supporting lives. And in the decades that followed, no Christmas or New Year, no wedding, no first communion or family funeral could pass without my dad, my uncles, or my dad and my uncles reliving, or depending on how much whisky had been consumed, actually attempting to reenact that goal.
On whisky?
Would my honourable friend give way?
Whisky.
No, on the whisky, I'd just like to thank my honourable friend for securing this debate and to let him know, as he does know, that my Uncle Owen played for Celtic and scored 8 goals in one game in 1927. We still have the ball in the house, it's still inflated with the laces. But most significantly, my next-door neighbour, Willie Garner, was signed by Celtic from Aberdeen, next door to me, and he scored 2 goals for Celtic against the opposition, and I think that might have been his second last game. He was signed by the great Billy McNeil, but he remains with us. I still admire him to that day, and I too was at the game against Vojvodina. So these memories will never, ever leave.
I thank Honourable Friend for that. And I remember Willie Garner signing for Celtic in the 1970s as well, the late 1970s. As we said earlier on, Mr Deputy Speaker, the late 1960s were undoubtedly the golden era of Scottish football. As well as Celtic's European triumph, everyone agrees, I think there's no doubt, everyone would agree that when Scotland beat England 3-2 to replace them as world champions. That's for you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the same time, Rangers came within a whisker of making Glasgow the first city in Europe to be home to both of the continent's premier trophies when they lost out in the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup to Bayern Munich in extra time. And Kilmarnock reached the semi-finals of the Fairs Cup that season too. And of course, Kilmarnock FC are now back in Europe for the first time in 53 years. And I'm sure the whole House will want me to join me in congratulating the team, but also the Honourable Member for Kilmarnock and Loudon for actually making it to his work today. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, it cannot ever be underestimated or underplayed just how important Celtic's victory was and the contribution that Scotland made to world football. And despite everything that Scottish football had achieved, much of Europe was still unconvinced and regarded Celtic's European Cup success as a flash in the pan. And even before Billy McNeil had paraded the European Cup back in Glasgow, the detractors were at work. Claims from Italy and Spain saying that Celtic's triumph was a fluke, and they began to circulate, with the Spanish press saying that the European Cup belonged in Madrid and that Real, who'd narrowly lost out to Inter Milan in the semi-final, were really the best team in Europe. And to prove the point, and to honour the legendary Alfredo Di Stefano, Real Madrid invited Celtic to play a challenge match at the Bernabeu in June 1967, at which, in front of 120,000 adoring fans, Real Madrid would put these Scottish upstarts firmly in their place. Billy McNeil's Celtic had other ideas, and the match played with the intensity of a cup final. It was the visitors, thanks to a Bobby Lennox goal, who emerged as worthy winners and confirmed once and for all that they were indeed the best football team in Europe. And even the Spanish press grudgingly agreed, with Marca declaring the following morning, "May the football which Celtic play stay among us."
Would you give way on that?
I will.
I thank my own friend for giving way. He's making a simply fantastic speech, and for those of us who are not Celtic fans, will simply shocked in the number of late goals that he's recounted that Celtic have scored. It seems nothing changes, Mr Deputy Speaker. But to bring it forward, to bring the Spanish reference forward to the present day, does he agree with me that it speaks of the warmth with which Billy McNeil is viewed? The Athletic Bilbao, a club with which Billy or Celtic has no real connections, awarded Billy McNeil their annual One Club Man Award just 3 weeks after he died, in a really touching ceremony in the stadium in the Basque region. It speaks volumes about the character of the man, doesn't it?
That's an excellent point. I thank my honourable friend for making it, and I think we were all surprised and delighted that Athletic Bilbao had recognised the achievement of Billy McNeil the way that they did. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is of course undeniably true that Celtic were the first team from the UK to lift Europe's Premier Trophy, but it was much more than that. Celtic, under Billy McNeil's captaincy, were the first winners of the European Cup to come from outside the giants of European football of Spain, Portugal or Italy. In the preceding 11 years of the competition's existence, it had only ever been won by Real Madrid, Benfica, AC Milan and Inter Milan. Celtic, led by Billy McNeil, played a style of football that ushered in a new, free-flowing attacking style, which was the antithesis of the stifling Catenaccio system or door-bolt system, which was so successfully employed, particularly by the Italians throughout the 1960s. And it was this free-flowing attacking football, exemplified by Celtic in '67, that was taken on by the Dutch, the Germans and the English clubs who went on to dominate for the next 2 decades. I will.
Just very briefly, I was also watched the 1967 European Cup final, and I watched it with my late father, who knew a thing or two about football, and I watched it with my brother, who kept a diary, and my brother's entry in the diary on that day says, "I don't remember watching my dad enjoy a game of football so much as he did today." And my dad obviously was a hoops man through and through, but those hoops were Greenock Morton.
And I think the honourable gentleman downplays the fact that his dad was a professional footballer and a hugely accomplished professional footballer for Greenock Morton. Mr Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier, my dad was present at Hampden in 1965 to see the start of the all-conquering McNeil era. In 1975, I was lucky enough to be at Hampden to see the last of his 822 appearances when Celtic beat Airdrie in the Scottish Cup final. And on Saturday, I, along with a whole new generation of O'Haras, will be back at Hampden, hoping to see our team complete a remarkable treble. And it's fitting that in the year that we lost both Billy McNeil and Steve Chalmers, that the players will be wearing numbers 5 or 9 on their shorts. Finally, I will very briefly, before I conclude.
Just before you leave the point, thank you very much. Just before you leave the point about 1967, is it not a great tribute at Parkhead every Saturday in the 67th minute, the Celtic fans shining their stars?
Yes, absolutely. And there are the hairs on the neck makes hairs on the neck stand up, and a big European night at Celtic Park under the floodlights to see it. And it must inspire, hopefully, a whole new generation of players. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, our condolences go to Billy's wife Liz, his children Susan, Carol, Libby, Paula and Martin, and to his 8 grandchildren. Scottish football has lost one of its very, very best, because not only was Billy McNeil a lion of a footballer, he was also a giant of a man.
David Linden. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and as the MP with the privilege of representing Celtic Park, I rise tonight to echo the tributes paid to the late, great Billy McNeil by my honourable friend, the member for Argyll and Bute, who I congratulate most sincerely on securing tonight's debate. Mr Deputy Speaker, for some bizarre reason there is a strange irony whereby many Scottish MPs do not in fact actually support the club located within their constituency, but I would argue that we are all the richer for that. In my own case, I declare openly and perhaps confess that I'm an Airdrieonian supporter, but we'll come back to Billy McNeil's links to Airdrie in just a few moments. Since being elected as the MP for East End, I've been proud to have a very good relationship with Celtic Football Club, which is a massive, iconic part of East End of Glasgow. And driving along London Road and seeing that towering statue produced by John McKenna of Billy holding aloft the European Cup is quite a sight to behold. And it's been so particularly in the last few weeks with those thousands of green and white scarves attached to it. And following Billy McNeil's sad passing, it really is hard to describe how much of an impact his death, but most importantly his life, has had throughout the city of Glasgow. And that's regardless of age or even which football club they support. And as my honourable friend has already outlined, Billy McNeil will be forever known in history as being the first ever player from these islands to lift the European Cup when Celtic triumphed in Lisbon back in 1967. And I would have expected nothing less, but my honourable friend from Argyll and Bute has paid a typically warm and thoughtful tribute to the career and life of Billy McNeil, so I don't intend to repeat much of that. However, when my honourable friend informed me that he had secured this evening's debate, he said to me, tongue-in-cheek I'm sure, that I wasn't allowed to mention Airdrie, a hurdle at which I fell just 3 paragraphs into my speech. But the link with Billy and Airdrieonians goes back to the Scottish Cup final of the 3rd of May 1975, when unfortunately Celtic defeated the Diamonds 3-1 at Hampden Park. And following that match, Billy announced his retirement from playing football. It would be his 822nd and last ever appearance for Celtic. And remarkably, in a career spanning so many years, he was never substituted, which I think is a tremendous achievement for any player. And I can't recall any other player who would have had that many appearances and not been substituted. But as my honourable friend outlined, Billy went on to have a career in management with spells at Clyde, Aberdeen, Man City, Aston Villa, Hibs, and of course 2 spells at the helm with his beloved Hoops. Both on and off the park, Billy made an enormous contribution to the beautiful game. And so it was right that so many from all across the footballing community came together to mourn his passing and remember his life. And it's not just people of Billy's generation who wish to mark a life well lived. On Saturday morning I was in Barlanark at Our Lady of Peace cheering on St Francis of Assisi Primary School, who went on to win the Billy McNeil Memorial Cup, and it's fitting that that cup be won and retained in the East End of Glasgow. But many of the boys and girls playing on Saturday morning in Barlanark recognised Billy McNeil's contribution and seek to emulate that in the years to come. But tonight, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, has been a fitting tribute to a man who has entertained so many and brought so much happiness, as we've heard, particularly to those dearest to him. He will, of course, be sorely missed, but his contribution will never be forgotten, and I'm glad that we've had the opportunity tonight to immortalise him in the chamber and in Hansard, and for that I thank my honourable friend most sincerely.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I thank the member for Argyll and Bute for the passionate and moving way that he introduced this debate. I feel that this has been a speech written a long time